Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, and this is our first in a three-part series covering the starter deck challenge format. Now this is a format I think is going to be very popular as the set releases this coming weekend on the 18th, as stores will have a lot of limited supply and constructed decks are going to be very hard for people to come across. And a lot of people aren't going to have them ready in order to start a tournament scene. So they're going to be probably doing a lot of these starter deck challenges, which, if you're not familiar, involves one of the three starter decks that you can get at release. In addition to, most of them are allowing you to modify the decks with that one pack that comes in the starter deck. So this video is actually going to be focusing on the Emerald and Ruby list, which I personally think is probably the worst list out of the box. In each of these videos, we're going to be covering the actual deck list. We're going to be covering the cards that I would focus on removing first, and also which cards I would prioritize when mulliganing those decks in particular matchups. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. We're back on Dreamborn.inc. We're going to be looking at the actual deck list as it is right now. So this is how it is out of the box. And like I said, out of the box, I think this is objectively the worst deck to get. Now, with the addition of the extra pack, that could change. We're going to break down the list, and then after we go through the list, we'll look at cards to take out, things I would mulligan for, so forth and so on, get into some of the deck strategies that's on it. But first, if you don't have the deck list, you have 2 copies of Duke of Wesselton, your 1-drop Inkable, 3 copies of Sergeant Tibbs, another 1-drop Inkable. You have Aladdin, the Prince Ali, which is 2-drop Inkable, 1 lore generator. Also a target for your 7-drop Shift Aladdin. First rare, this is a foil rare for the deck, is Cruella de Vil here. 2-drop Inkable. You have 3 copies of Megara. She's 2-drop Inkable. A little understated for that, but does have an effect that can come into play. Donald Duck, another solid 2-drop here. Your 2/3. Very favorable trades early in the game with him. LeFou, your other rare for the deck here. I believe this is the second foil that you get in the deck. He is perfectly well statted for a 2-drop, can come in real nice in this deck as well with that Fan the Flames ability. Horus, your 3-drop, slightly overstated on strength. Iago, your 3-drop here. Very conditional removal, but decent removal. Not a terrible mid-game top deck. Because of his ability, you got a problem where he can give a character that they have Reckless. This deck does probably have the overall biggest characters in the pool, so being able to force them to swing and then be able to either swing back is very nice on that one. Jasper, very solid 3-drop here. You have 2 copies of him. A little overstated on the willpower with an ability, Puppy Napping, that shuts down your opponent's key individual. Late game, this can be really good because they could play a character who is not challengeable, and you can still use this ability to make it to where they can't quest for lore the following turn. Mickey Mouse, this is kind of your overstated 3-drop. You're going to see one of these in most of the colors. Your 3/4 for 3 that is inkable is very nice. Peter Pan, here's your first evasive character for this deck, which is one of the strengths of this deck, is the number of evasive characters. He is the least good of the ones that come in the deck, mostly just because he has 1 lore generation only and 2 willpower only, which means the Fire of the Cannons that the Steel deck is playing and the Grab Your Swords will both hit him. Still not a ton that challenges into him that survives, so overall stats not terrible. And he's inkable, which is nice. We have our 3-drop Aladdin, Street Rat. Again, understated. You're really playing him because you're playing the 7-drop Aladdin. I think they have 5 targets to shift up to the 7-drop Aladdin, so that's kind of nice. Solid enough to play in this constructed form or sealed format as well. Now, Pongo. Pongo is probably our first all-star of the deck here. This card can almost single-handedly defeat the Amethyst Amber deck, because they have no way of really dealing with him other than 2 of their copies of not Jasper, Jetsam. There we go. Sorry. That's their only evasive card in there that can trade into this. They're also playing Chameleon, Pascal. There we go. Sorry. But, I mean, at this power difference, they really have no way of challenging successfully. And the fact that he generates 2 lore puts them on a very short clock to get one of those 2 answers. You play 3 copies of this card in your deck. They only play 2 answers to this card in their entire deck. So this card is kind of the silver bullet for that deck. We'll get into that a little bit more after we go through the full list. Scar, Fiery, Super. This guy is not good, unfortunately. This deck is very short on inkable cards, so you really can't afford to take him out unless you just get a really stellar pack to add to this. It's unfortunate, but at the very least, you'll have something to ink well into it. Possibly a favorable trade. Mad Hatter here is another huge bomb for this deck. He's a 3 lore generator that you have 3 of in your deck. Very hard to race this guy. And when he gets challenged, you're going to be refilling your hand. Your opponent is not going to want to swing into him, but pretty much be forced to do it because there's really neither of the other decks that can afford to race a 3 lore generator. So this guy's very much your top end at 5, as the deck is very hard to get to 5 without inking some really good cards. When I played in the starter deck tournament, the opponent that I played that was playing this deck had to ink 2 copies of Mad Hatter just so that he could play the 3rd copy that he had in his hand, because there's just so few inkable cards in this deck. Captain, this guy is another solid body. If you can get up to 5 ink without making a lot of sacrifices, this 6/5 is going to trade usually for 2, possibly for 3 characters on your opponent's side of the board. He's only got 1 lore generation, so they're probably not going to be too focused on challenging him down, but that's fine, which means you get to choose the challenges for him to get the most out of those 6/5 stats. Rapunzel, letting down her hair. Now, she's got decent body and 2 lore generation. The thing that kills her, though, is she's uninkable and a 6-drop. And there's 3 of them in this deck. You know, when we talk about how few inkables are in this deck, this is not what you want to see most times, because 6 is very hard for this deck to get to. And the fact that she can't even help you get there with 3 copies of them in the deck is pretty rough. Now, if you can manage to get to 6, that's great. She's solid. Like I said, her stats are usually going to trade for more than 1 character, or at least one of their biggest characters that they have. And then 2 lore generation is not bad to top deck either late in the game if you have enough to play her. But again, it's kind of tough with the box as it is out of the deck. Stitch, awesome card here. He does 6. Again, I will state it is hard to get to 6 with this deck as it is. But if you do get him, he's solid stats, 3 lore generator. And then we have Aladdin to finish out our characters at our top end. Now, you're mostly only going to be able to get him into play if you're able to shift him, because as hard as it is to get to 6, it's almost insurmountable to get to 7 out of the box with this deck. But shifting him on 5 and having 5 targets in the deck is fine. And even if you don't, again, he is inkable. But if he gets into play, he's absolutely a huge game changer. He's a 4 lore swing if he challenges. And if he can get 2 challenges off, it's just absolutely insane. All right, going into our actions. First one we have here is Stampede. This card is trash. It is uninkable, conditional removal. It will only come into effect a very handful number of times, and it probably won't even be in your hand those times when you actually want it. And the fact that it's not inkable is just going to leave it in your hand so often that it's going to hurt. I'm telling you, it's going to hurt your feelings more than once. These types of cards are a big reason why this deck struggles so much without the additional extra pack being added in, because there's just going to be so many scenarios where you end up drawing 1, 2, sometimes even 3 cards that you just can't play and you can't ink. Vicious Betrayal, and he's got a sword, are basically the same card here, so we'll cover them at the same time. They're basically going to be ink. They are a way to trade up, but they're not a way to make it a favorable trade a lot of times. Versus Amber and Sapphire, both having cards that'll drop your opponent's strength so that your guy can stick around. This one may be able to help them punch up, but they're still probably going to die in the exchange. They are inkable though, so again, as much as I would like to replace them, there are a lot of other cards that need to be filtered out. First and foremost, number one on that list is this card here, Steal from the Rich. Not only do they take up a rare spot in your deck with this garbage card, it is not inkable, pretty much unplayable, and at the very best application of this card, like a win more card, which is the worst type of card to have be uninkable. It is the first card you need to cut if you have nothing other than another Grab Your Sword to put in instead of it. This card needs to go. If you could play a 59 cards, I would recommend just cutting this one entirely versus playing with it in your deck. You're really just never going to want to see this card, and it's going to clog your hand up, and it just is going to make you feel bad whenever you're in a game that's so resource dependent in your hand, and you've got Steal from the Rich just sitting there. Dragonfire, while it is not uninkable and there are 3 copies of it in the deck, it is also one of the best removal spells, certainly for the format, but even in Constructed, one of the best removal spells. This is a card that you can make the concession of not being uninkable on. However, with 3 copies in there, you've really got to jam a lot of inkable cards in so that this isn't a hindrance. I have definitely had games where I was stuck at 4 with 3 Dragonfires in my hand, and that's not a fun place to be at. Then we go down to our songs. Mother Knows Best. Again, great tempo card, but again, we have 3 copies of a card that is uninkable in the deck, so it is a little rough as the deck stands out of the box. I don't think you cut this card as a top priority. We can start adding cards into it, but I will let you know, like, this is not a card you probably want to keep in your opening hand, due to the fact that it's not inkable, and you may not be able to get to 3 ink without putting cards down that you really want to be playing in that game. Then we have our last 2 items here, our Shield of Virtue at 2 and our Stolen Scimitar of 2. I really like Shield of Virtue as even a constructive, kind of like one of. The fact that it's inkable, there's not a whole lot of risk to it, with a decent upside in the right scenarios. I mean, if you have this in play and you shift into Aladdin and you can get 2 attacks off in 1 turn with it, that's an 8 lore swing on that turn. So I really like the application of it. It's inkable, so it's not really any risk to run it in your deck, and has some upside to it. So it's one of the last cards I would prioritize as far as like taking it out. Stolen Scimitar here, though, is trash. Its only benefit is to be inked. There may be a few clutch scenarios where you can play it that turn and have a lower character trade up a little bit higher because of the +1. I doubt very highly like that you're going to find that magical scenario where you've got a 2-power Aladdin and there just happens to be a 4, you know, toughness guy out there to use that magical +2. It may happen. But 99% of the time, this card's going to end up in your inkwell, which is fine because, like I said, this deck is hungry for ink. There are going to be times when you are very, very happy to be drawing Stolen Scimitar because it gives you something to put into your inkwell that turn. We kind of break down. I mean, you can see the percentage: 12 non-inkable cards in the deck versus the 48 inkable. But you got to keep in mind, like, your inkable ones are also kind of expensive. Like, the deck is kind of expensive, like your overall cost. I mean, you can see how high your 5 curve is and your 6 and your 7. I'd have to double check, but I would say this is the most expensive deck, especially when you're talking about hitting cards you want to play, like your Mad Hatters, your Dragonfires, and your Aladdins. There are some expensive cards in some of the other decks, but they're usually not the cards you need to win. I mean, Steel's got Maui, but like Maui's just not good. So now we're going to move over. We're going to go to breaking down the cards that I would take out first and how I would prioritize them. Now, obviously, it's going to change a little bit based on how many playable cards you get in your pack, but you'll be able to determine that on your own. Okay, so we got 15 cards here. Now, obviously, the most you're going to get out of one pack to upgrade is 12. This is going to kind of give you an idea based on what you pull, where I would prioritize the ones that need to come out versus being replaced. If you pull an absolutely bonkers 12 packs, or if you pull some stuff that may make some of these choices better or worse choices, then you'll kind of have an idea. But these are like the 15 cards that would be the first to come out of the deck, which should tell you something, that this deck has 15 cards that I would pull out of it if I had the option to do. Again, the remaining cards are very good, maybe even the best out of the remaining ones, but you just have a very large pool of cards that aren't helping you to win this. I'm going to jump around a little bit just because these aren't all necessarily in order, and I do want to prioritize them in order. Number one is Steal from the Rich. This card has to come out of your deck. You can try to find a home for it as much as you want. I'm just telling you that this card is not good. You don't want it in there. Take it out. It will lose you more games, single-handedly lose you more games than it could ever hope to possibly win in that magical scenario. Take this card out. Shortly behind that one will be your Stampede. This card, again, is just not good. It's going to clog up your hand more often than not. It's not inkable. We've got to get more ink into this deck any way we can, and this card not being inkable and being situational means it just cannot make the cut. So we have got 3 uninkable cards right there. Unfortunately, due to the number of high-end cards we want to get to, a number of these Rapunzels need to come out. If you don't want to take out all 3, I can understand not wanting to take out all 3. Not being inkable, though, is pretty horrendous for what we're trying to do right here, especially if you end up drawing some other high-end stuff out of your pack, some other 5 or 6 drops that you really want to be able to play. These are going to have to come out because a 6 drop that is uninkable is really just going to hinder that, especially in a deck that has very limited card draw options. Now, out of the ones that have the ability to be inked, the lowest priority on those is going to be the He's Got a Sword, followed by Vicious Betrayal, as Vicious Betrayal is slightly better than He's Got a Sword. There's really no reason to play this card over this one. So if you got some room, obviously cutting the He's Got a Sword before the Vicious Betrayal. And to that effect, kind of the same with the Stolen Scimitar down here. It is slightly better than these 2 in the constructed deck. But those would be the next ones to come out for me. They are basically just ink in the deck. So if you can find cards in your pack that have the ability to produce ink and also be playable and help impact your win condition, those would be cards that I would replace with that. And then finally, Megara. Out of the inkable characters that are in the deck, she is probably the worst one, with the Scar being a close second. He can at least trade pretty favorably in his cost. She cannot. She is going to make you trade one of your other guys favorably, and then she just sits out there very understated herself. You know, people are going to be playing the 1/3 Olafs and the 1/3 Minnie Mouses, and they just swing into her and stay afterwards, which is really problematic. Prince Eric, a lot of 2-drops that just trade with her, and then she sticks around. And even some 1-drops. So she would be the, if you get that far into it to where you're cutting inkable characters, she would be the ones that I would cut in that scenario. Now from here, we'll move into the cards that I would mulligan hard for. So yeah, here we have the cards that I would be mulliganing for in my first hand. So if you're not familiar, in this game, you have your opening hand of 7 cards. You choose which cards you want to keep. Set the cards aside that you don't want to keep, refill your hand back to 7, and then shuffle them back in. Now, these are the cards that you want to see in your opening hand. And if you don't, these are the ones that I would mulligan very aggressively to get. Now, top priority to throw cards back, especially out of the box. Anything that's not inkable and probably over the cost of 4, I would get rid of. So anything that means those cards, even the better cards. I know we talked about how Dragonfire was really good. Now, if you have a solid hand already and Dragonfire's in it, then feel free to keep that card. Just keep in mind, you may not be able to play that Dragonfire right on 5 just to do the low cost of or the low number of inkable cards in this deck. Same with Mad Hatter. Like, it's very tempting to want to keep a Mad Hatter in your opening hand, and if you have a very strong opening hand, that is fine. But more often than not, you're going to be better to throw him back and hope you hit one of the 3 copies of those 2 cards that you have later in the game when you have enough ink for them. Having said that, these are the cards you really want to be mulliganing for, and pretty much both are all three matchups: the mirror, the blue sapphire, blue steel deck, and the amber and amethyst deck. 1-drops are super important in these matchups. If you miss your 1-drop, you can go pretty far behind, especially if you also miss a 2-drop. Getting 3 to 4 lore behind your opponent in a lot of these games can be just insurmountable at the beginning, especially if your opponent does not miss a beat going from that point forward. Now, obviously, if they stall with a board full of 1-drops, you can catch up, but if they keep curving out and you started behind, it's very, very difficult. So you really want to make sure you have a 1-drop to challenge into theirs, or better yet, if they don't get a 1-drop, you can be the one that comes ahead with that. So I would definitely focus on getting either Sergeant Tibbs or Duke of Wesselton in your opening hand. And it's one less low drop that you're going to top deck late in the game that you get to play early on. Now, Donald Duck is another monster early in the game. That 2-3 stat line is going to allow him to trade evenly and survive with all these 1-drops that your opponent's going to be hopefully trying to put out on the board too. So all these guys you can see are 2-2s. He's going to swing in, take one down, and he's still going to be around to swing in again if they had. The presence of this guy in play a lot of times keeps your opponent from being able to quest with these characters at all. So very, very solid early drop for the deck, followed by our 2 evasive characters in the deck. Now, out of the 2, Pongo's obviously, again, the all-star here. That 2 lore generation and that 3 willpower are insane upgrades to Peter Pan's 1 and 2 that we have over here. However, Peter Pan is still a very good card, and I would not toss him back in if he was in my opening 7. Evasive is a very, very, very strong keyword against the Amber Amethyst matchup. It's not an easy keyword for the Sapphire Steel deck to deal with either. They don't have any evasive characters their own, with the exception of their big 7-drop Simba, who can gain it whenever he's challenging. So that pretty much forces them to save their removal spells for these cards. Smashes for Pongos and Fire the Cannons for Peter Pan. So still not bad in that matchup, and I would still prioritize these cards. But for Amber Amethyst, these cards right here puts them on a very, very short clock for a deck that does not have a lot of lore generation. If you resolve a Pongo on curve, chances are you are not going to lose that matchup against the Amber Amethyst deck, unless they get some pretty fortunate draws with their Jetsams and being able to keep them alive and swing into it. So if you have that, that's definitely what I would mull to in those scenarios. So there you have it. That is the deck list. That is the cards that I would prioritize when taking cards out and replacing them with your booster pack, and the cards I would mulligan for in that matchup. Make sure you guys leave me any questions or comments down in the comment section below. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.